While the sinking of the Titanic was a terrible tragedy, it also exposed moments of great triumph. In the midst of disasters, many individuals stood up with courage for their fellow men, even putting others' lives before their own. In 1867, Thomas Ishmay, a businessman, bought the White Star Line, a shipping line that transported goods and passengers. The ships at that time were wooden sailing ships. In 1870, Harland and Wolff Shipyard formed a partnership with the White Star Line to make a fleet of iron steamships. The White Star took delivery of their first iron steamship, the Oceanic, from Harland and Wolff that same year. This union led to the creation of the Titanic. In 1862, Thomas's son, Bruce Ishmay, was born. This young boy was destined to become a leader in his father's business. In this same year, 15-year-old William James Peary became an apprentice at the White Star Line. Within 12 years, at the age of 27, Peary had worked his way up to a partner in the firm. In 1907, Peary, now Lord Peary, met with Bruce Ishmay as an equal, both men holding leadership positions in the company. This meeting led to the decision to create 3 great sister ships, all with similar designs. The names were chosen for the ships: the Olympic, Titanic, and Gigantic. Thus begins the story, tragedy, and triumph of the Titanic. Construction on the Titanic began March 31st, 1909. Flash forward 3 years to April 2nd, 1912, when the final modifications were made to the Titanic, and it completed its sea test. Only 8 days later, on April 10th, the day of the maiden voyage arrived. The Titanic used an enormous amount of coal per day, 650 tons. This enormous quantity, together with the great coal strike that was currently happening, meant that the White Star Line had to divert coal from some of their other ships to the Titanic. After the ship was fully stocked, the passengers were allowed to board and were promptly escorted to their rooms. Once the Captain Edward John Smith was assured that all was well, the Titanic began its planned transatlantic journey with a couple of short, sharp whistles. The first early indication of danger came at 9 a.m. on April 14th, when the ship called Caronia radioed the Titanic to report bergs, growlers, and field ice. The Caronia was traveling ahead of the Titanic along the same route. This was the first of many messages that came in from other ships, warning the Titanic of possible danger. Many of these messages were never reported far up the chain of command. Most never made it to Captain Smith. At 7:30 p.m., a ship called the California alerted the Titanic to the fact that they were surrounded by ice. This was sent when the Titanic was just 50 miles away from their location. After 10 p.m. on that fateful night, the 2-man lookout crew was relieved. One of the departing lookouts, named Simmons, told the new crewmen to keep a sharp eye out for ice, especially small bergs and growlers. The night was foggy, making the job of lookout hard. The fog cleared away, but visibility was still bad enough that all talking ceased as the lookouts focused on the water. About 20 minutes before midnight, one of the lookouts, named Fleet, noticed a small object in the water that was rapidly growing in size. The Titanic was just off the coast of Newfoundland and was traveling at 22.5 knots. The ocean water was around 28 degrees Fahrenheit that night. After just a moment of hesitation, Fleet rang the bell to alert all the rest of the crew of the danger. The ship made a hard turn to starboard, and the lookouts in the crow's nest breathed a sigh of relief, as it had appeared as though they had passed by the berg without any incident. The reason the iceberg had not been spotted sooner was that it was recently overturned, making the berg practically invisible. Those in the crow's nest also had not been issued binoculars, making it even harder to see in the darkness. Although the crew in the crow's nest thought they had missed the berg, Seaman Fred Clench remembered being awakened by the crunching and jarring, as if the ship was hitting up against something. At midnight, Thomas Andrews reported to Captain Smith that 6 of the watertight compartments had been breached. The Titanic was beginning to sink. Many curious passengers, awakened by the jolt, began to trickle onto the upper decks. It was a bitter cold night, and the iceberg had already passed behind them. The only sign that it had been there was the ice left behind on the deck. Many passengers were assured that all was well and just went back to sleep, and some even played in the ice chunks. Despite the nonchalance of the passengers, Bonson, Nichols, and most of the other crew knew that the ship had a half hour to live. Around 12:15, Philip, a radio operator on the Titanic, began to send out the message, CQD, CQD, MGY, 41 degrees and 46 minutes north, 50 degrees and 14 minutes west, CQD, MGY. This was a distress signal, which included the location, name, and CQD, the universal distress signal. When Captain Smith came in to better understand the situation, he asked, "What call are you sending?" This made Bride realize that the standard distress signal was no longer CQD, it had just been changed to SOS. It was because of its simplicity that SOS was chosen as the new distress signal. With a laugh, Bride said, "Send SOS. It's a new call. And besides, this may be your last chance to send it." So at 12:45, the first SOS in history was sent out. Meanwhile, on deck, Boxall began trying to contact a nearby ship by Morse lamp, having seen a ship not too far off in the distance. At the same time, Rowe began to let off white rockets, yet another universal distress signal. At one point, the ship even appeared to be heading towards them and signaling them. Both, however, turned out not to be true. Despite these setbacks, the men spent the rest of the night trying to get help. While these signals were going out, more and more people were gathering on the boat deck, struggling to comprehend the danger. As a famous Molly Brown put it, it was difficult for anyone to realize it was a tragedy. They stood in little groups and talked. Smith and many of the other crew had already realized a horrifying and frightening truth. Half the people did not have a spot on the lifeboat. Because of the Titanic's notion that it was unsinkable, there had been not enough lifeboats been put on to accommodate the number of people. Captain Smith had already ordered everyone to the boat deck with their lifebelts on. Although many people were gathered on the boat deck, the seriousness of the situation had not completely sunk in, and most, if not all, third-class passengers were not there. Stuart Hart realized this and began to set about to change it. At midnight, he went to the third-class passengers and set to work to help them. He took the first group to the boat deck around 12:50. Once there, he led them to boat 8 and tried to put them on the boat. They, however, did not realize the danger, so many of them just ran back into the ship and its warmth. He gave up and brought a second group up to the deck to boat 15. Prepared to get another group, First Officer Murdoch refused to let him to go back, instead making him get on boat 15. His heroic actions led to the survival of many third-class passengers. Down in the belly of the Titanic, Chief Engineer Bell and his men refused to leave their stations, determined to keep the lights and radio running. They knew there was a huge risk in doing this, as they were in the lowest points of the ship. They kept going even after they knew they were not going to be able to leave. They knew they would die, but continued to do their job. An unidentified crew member saw that the distress of Miss Minnie Coots, who was trying to find a lifebelt for herself, and without hesitation gave his own lifebelt to her. As he handed the belt to her, he said, "There now. If the ship goes down, you'll remember me." He confirmed the severity of the situation and gave instructions to the boat deck. Minnie never asked his name. The heroism was not just limited to the crew. A majority of the passengers showed heroism in equal or greater amounts. One such example was Jim Farrell's. He helped Kate Murphy, Kate Mullen, and Kathy Gilmont get through a sailor who was refusing to let them through to the boat deck. Both men and women showed great courage when refusing a spot on a lifeboat. Winnie Trout decided that she would not let other men give up their positions just so she could have a seat. Her mind was only changed when she was handed a child and asked to save this baby. She readily agreed to take the baby and quickly got onto the collapsible D boat. Ida Strauss and her husband, Isidore, were given the opportunity to go in the lifeboats. Isidore said, "I will not go before other men." Ida chose to stay with her husband. Both chose to let others go before them as they sat on a pair of deck chairs. Captain Smith, who had made his wife get on a lifeboat earlier, chose to go down with his ship. After the last lifeboat had been sent off, many began to realize that they were probably not going to make it, particularly as the boat began to list more and more. The musicians played "Nearer My God to Thee" until they literally could not. As the ship sank, the crash of all the metal screeching past each other and the shouts of "I love you" created a tragic scene. Many could not bear to watch the Titanic and its ill-fated passengers' final moments. As Emily Borey Ryerson put it, the great ship took a plunge, and then she seemed to break in half as if cut with a knife. In Boat 6, Molly Brown, another brave woman, would make Quartermaster Robert Hitchin, who forced himself as the leader of the boat, turn around to help others. When he would not relent, Molly told him that she would throw him overboard. This is what got her dubbed the unsinkable Molly Brown. In Boat 14, 5th Officer Lowe decided to save whomever he could. He only managed to save a few men, but despite the negative reaction of those on his boat, he never gave up. The people he saved may not have made a huge change in the world, but Officer Lowe's decision to go and turn back made a huge difference in the lives of those he saved. At 3:30, just an hour after the Titanic was reported to have sank, the Carpathia, a Cunard liner, arrived to the location of the sinking. The Carpathia changed its route and saved countless lives. All the passengers on the Carpathia did all they could for the survivors. They found any extra clothing, making room in their cabins, and anything else they could aid them with. The Titanic is an inspiring story that truly shows the strength that courage has in a tragic situation. Despite the catastrophe that surrounded them, many found within themselves the courage to put others' lives before their own. If the Titanic had not sunk with the unselfish people, its name would have only been well known as the Olympic and gigantic.